Welcome back. In this unit, we're going to discuss the assignment of contractual rights and the delegation of contractual duties. All right, as we already said, in this unit, we're talking about assignment and delegation. What is assignment? What is delegation? Well, if I have a right under a contract, I'm a party to a contract and I have certain rights under that contract. Maybe I have a right to performance. Maybe I have a right to receive payment. If I transfer my contractual right to a third party, that is called an assignment of rights. What is a delegation of duties? Well, same thing. If I'm a party to a contract, I have certain obligations, certain duties under that contract. I might have a duty to perform under that contract, some sort of services. I might have a duty to deliver some sort of goods, or I might have a duty to make payment under the contract to the other party. If I delegate my duties under my contract to a third party, a party who is not a party to the contract, that is called a delegation of duties. In other words, I get a third party to perform my contractual obligations for me. Careful, delegation of duties is not a transfer of those duties, and we'll talk about that more. In this subunit, we'll talk about the basic concepts of assignment of rights and the delegation of duties. We'll talk about the differences between assignment of rights and delegation of duties, and we'll talk about the specific terminology we use when we talk about the assignment of rights and the delegation of duties. Let's compare assignment of rights and delegation of duties. First, let's look at assignment of rights. An assignment of rights is an actual transfer of your contractual right to a third party. Once you transfer that right to that third party, you no longer have that right. So imagine I have a right to payment under a contract. If I transfer my right to payment to a third party, I no longer have that right to receive payment under the contract. Think of the different rights that a party might have under a contract. You might have a right to receive payment. You might have a right to receive services. You might have a right to receive delivery of goods. You might have the right to receive real property. Or you might have a right to use something under a lease or under an intellectual property license. Now, in this subunit, we're going to discuss whether all rights are assignable. Look at that list of rights there. Look at that list of rights. Are all of those rights assignable? Well, we'll talk about that later in this unit. Let's talk about delegation of duties. Now, delegation of duties is different. If I delegate a contractual duty to a third party, I have not transferred that duty. I am still bound under the contract. So if I transfer a duty to a third party, that third party does not perform that duty, I am still liable under the contract. So delegation of duties is not a transfer of the duty. Just think of it as getting someone else to do your work for you. What type of contractual duties might you delegate? Well, you might have a duty to make payment. You might have a duty to provide certain services under the contract. You might have a duty to deliver goods under the contract. You might have a duty to deliver real property under a contract. Also, you might have a duty to allow the other party to use something, such as under a lease of goods or real property, or when you license intellectual property to the third party under the contract. In delegation of duties, we're going to ask the same question. Can you delegate any duty under a contract? And naturally, there are going to be some duties that you cannot delegate under a contract. Just as with assignment, there are certain rights under a contract that you may not be able to assign. Let's look at an example of an assignment of rights to better understand what assignment is, how it works, and the terminology we use in conjunction with an assignment of rights. So here's our contract. We have a contract between H and P. H is the homeowner and P is the painter. So we have a contract between homeowner and painter. Homeowner naturally promises to pay painter, and painter promises to paint homeowner's house. Now we have C. C is not a party to the contract, and we'll see how C fits in here once we see who assigns their right under the contract. So in this case, we have painter who is assigning its right under the contract to C. So let's take a look at what painter's right is under this contract. So painter's obligation is to paint, but painter's right is to receive payment from homeowner. So homeowner promises to homeowner promises to pay painter, and painter assigns the right to receive payment to C. That is an assignment of rights. P has assigned her rights to receive payment to C. Now, what do we call each of these parties in the assignment context? Well, in this case, H is the obligor. Homeowner is the obligor. What is the obligation? The obligation is to make payment. Painter is the obligee, right? What is the obligation that P has a right to? P has a right to payment from H. Now, P, painter, assigns that right to C, so P, painter, is the assignor, or some people pronounce it assigner. I was taught to pronounce it assignor. I pronounce it both ways. So P is the assignor, the one making the assignment. P makes the assignment to C, and C is the assignee, or the assignee. I was taught to pronounce it assignee. All right, so there we have an assignment of rights, and we have the terminology for each of the parties that is involved in this assignment of rights. All right, let's take another look at it. Same pattern, same contract. We have a homeowner who promises to pay painter, and we have a painter who promises to paint homeowner's house. We also have C, who is not a party to the contract. Let's say in this case, homeowner assigns her rights under the contract to C. Well, what are homeowner's rights under the contract? Well, homeowner's rights under the contract are the rights to receive the services from P, the rights to receive house painting services. And you might right now at this moment question, can homeowner assign that type of right to a third party? Well, we'll discuss that in the next subunit. In this subunit, let's just look at it and assume that homeowner can assign this right to somebody else, even though homeowner probably can't assign this right to someone else. So under this fact pattern, who is the obligor, who is the obligee, who is the assignor, and who is the assignee? Well, in this case, the obligor is painter. The obligee is homeowner, right? We're talking about payment. Who has that obligation? We're talking about painting. Who has the obligation to paint? That's the house painter, and house painter is then the obligor. Who has the right to receive the painting services? That is homeowner, and so homeowner is the obligee. Who assigns the right? Well, the homeowner assigns the right, so H, the homeowner, is the assignor. And who receives the right? Right. The C receives the right, so C is the assignee. Let's look at a case of delegation. We have the same contract. We have a homeowner and a painter. The homeowner promises to pay for the services, and the painter promises to provide painting services to the homeowner. We have C, who is not a party to the contract. Painter delegates her duty to provide painting services to homeowner to C. So painter delegates the duty to C. Here, painter is the obligor. Painter has the obligation. Under the contract, homeowner is the obligee of the duty to paint. Homeowner receives the painting services. Now, delegation of a duty is from the obligor to the third party. So when P delegates her duty to C, it's the duty to paint, right, under the contract. When P delegates that duty to C, P is the delegator, and C is the delegate, or sometimes you'll see people pronounce it or add an E to it and call it the delegatee. All right, so that is the delegation scenario. Now, one important thing to remember about the delegation scenario is that when painter delegates her duty under the contract to C, so that now C will perform the painting services for homeowner, painter has not transferred her duty to C, she has only delegated her duty to C. What's the difference? Well, because painter has not because painter has not transferred her duties to C, painter is still liable for the duties under the contract. So if C performs the painting services horribly, P is still liable to H for breach of contract under this contract. Let's change things up a bit. We still have the same contract between the homeowner and painter, where homeowner promises to pay for the services and painter promises to provide painting services. We still have C, who is a third party and is not a party to the contract. Now, in this hypothetical, H, homeowner, delegates her contractual duties to C. Now, what are H's contractual duties? Well, H's contractual duty is to pay P, pay the painter for the painting services. So H's contractual obligation is to make payment. H delegates that duty to C. So what that means is now C will pay P and H will not pay the painter. In this scenario, H is the obligor, homeowner is the obligor because homeowner has the obligation to pay. Painter is the obligee because painter is the beneficiary or the recipient of the obligation to pay. When homeowner delegates her duty to C, homeowner is now the delegator and C is the delegate or the delegatee. Let's talk about a very important issue in assignment of rights and delegation of duties, and that is the assignment of a contract. Now, up to this point, we have said you assign rights and you delegate duties. Assign rights and delegate duties. What does it mean to assign a contract? Well, there really is no such thing. You assign rights and you delegate duties. So if you're a party to a contract and you assign your contract, what does that mean? Similarly, if you're a party to a contract and the contract prohibits you from assigning the contract, what does that mean? Now, if the contract had said you're prohibited from assigning your rights, you're prohibited from delegating your duties, we would understand what that means because you assign rights and you delegate duties. But what does it mean to assign a contract? So first, if a party says, I have assigned my contract, what does that mean? Well, there really is no such thing as assigning a contract. But lawyers, judges, lay people use this term frequently. And so we have to understand how a court will interpret this. Basically, if you assign a contract, you're a party to a contract, and you assign that contract to a third party, the court's going to say what you have done is you have assigned your rights under your contract to the third party, and you have delegated your duties under that contract to the third party. So an assignment of a contract, if you said, I am assigning this contract to a third party, then you have assigned your rights and delegated your duties to the third party. What if there's a contractual clause that says that neither party to this contract may assign the contract to the third parties? What does that mean? Well, what courts say this means is that the parties cannot delegate their duties under the contract. The idea is that if these rights are assignable, the parties wouldn't prohibit the other party from assigning the rights under the contract. So when they say there's a prohibition on the assignment of the contract, it's a little bit ambiguous. And so we'll interpret it to mean that you can only you're only prohibited from delegating your duties under the contract. All right, so once again, let's just summarize what we talked about. If a party to a contract says, I am assigning this contract to a third party, courts will understand this to mean that you are assigning your rights and delegating your duties under the contract to a third party. If there's a clause in a contract that prohibits the assignment of the contract to third parties, a court is going to interpret this clause to mean that you cannot delegate your duties under the contract. You may still assign your rights, but you may not delegate your duties under the contract.